The smell of cheap industrial carpet still haunts me. That specific odor of synthetic fibers mixed with stale coffee and the faint mustiness of old songbooks. Whenever I catch it somewhere, in a waiting room or a government office, my hands start trembling. Before my mind even registers why, I am 63 years old now, and I have spent most of my life trying to forget what happened in those carpeted rooms where men in ill-fitting suits decided my spiritual fate. But some memories refuse to stay buried, no matter how deep you dig the grave. My name is Evelyn Ruth Ashford, and this is my story. A story I never thought I would tell publicly, because for decades I believed the lie they planted in my head, that speaking would bring shame upon Jehovah's name, that my silence was a form of worship, that the truth of what happened to me was somehow less important than the reputation of an organization that called itself God's only channel on earth. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a small house on Catalpa Drive where azaleas bloomed every spring, and my mother kept the windows spotless for when brothers and sisters from the congregation visited. We were Jehovah's Witnesses, third generation. My grandmother converted in the early 50s, and by the time I was born in 1965, the organization was the air we breathed, the lens through which we saw every aspect of existence. My childhood was measured not in school years or summer vacations, but in assembly seasons and magazine campaigns. Tuesday nights were book study meetings at Sister Patterson's house, where her cat would sleep on the radiator, and the smell of her oatmeal cookies would mix with the drone of paragraph readings. Thursday evenings meant the theocratic ministry school and service meeting at the Kingdom Hall, that tan brick building on Riverside Drive that I can still draw from memory. Every crack in the parking lot, every stain on the ceiling tiles. Sundays were for the public talk and watchtower study, followed by field service in the afternoon, knocking on doors with my mother while she carried her worn burgundy Bible, and I clutched a handful of magazines featuring illustrations of Paradise Earth. If you are watching this, perhaps you know exactly what I am describing. Perhaps you grew up counting the hours you spent in service, worrying whether you were doing enough to survive Armageddon. Or perhaps you are a Jehovah's Witness right now, and something in your spirit led you to click on this video, despite knowing you should not be here. Either way, I want you to understand that what I am about to share is not an attack on your faith in God. This is a testimony about what humans can do when they believe they answer to no earthly authority, when they convince themselves that protecting an institution is the same as protecting the divine. In 1976, when I was 11 years old, a man named Harold Vincent Whitmore entered our lives. He had transferred to our congregation from somewhere in Pennsylvania, and the elders introduced him as a spiritually mature brother who had served faithfully for many years. He was in his late 40s then, with grey-streaked hair combed neatly to one side, and the kind of soft-spoken manner that adults found reassuring. My mother was particularly impressed with him. "Evelyn, Brother Whitmore is an example of someone who puts Jehovah first," she told me one Sunday after meeting, while we arranged folding chairs in the back of the hall. "You should pay attention to how he conducts himself. That is what spiritual maturity looks like." I remember nodding obediently, though something about the way he looked at me during meetings made my stomach feel strange, a cold, crawling sensation I did not have words for at 11. I told myself it was just my imagination, that wicked thoughts sometimes came from Satan trying to corrupt young minds, exactly as the publications warned. Harold began visiting our home regularly. My father had died when I was 7, a car accident on I-75 during an ice storm, and my mother often invited brothers from the congregation to help with household repairs and provide spiritual guidance for our family. Harold was particularly attentive. He fixed the leak under our kitchen sink. He helped my mother study for watchtower lessons. He brought me small gifts, a notebook with flowers on the cover, a set of colored pencils, a children's Bible story book. Looking back now, I can see every step of the grooming process with terrible clarity. The way he gradually normalized physical affection, starting with pats on the shoulder and progressing to hugs that lasted too long. The way he created opportunities to be alone with me, offering to pick me up from school when my mother was busy with service. The way he tested my boundaries with inappropriate comments disguised as spiritual instruction. But at 11, I understood none of this. I only knew that Brother Whitmore made me uncomfortable, and that every time I tried to express this discomfort, adults told me I should be grateful for his attention. Grateful that such a spiritually strong brother was taking an interest in our family's welfare. The Kingdom Hall on Riverside Drive is still there. I drove past it last year for the first time in decades and had to pull over because I could not stop shaking. The tan bricks looked exactly the same. The parking lot had been repaved, but the building itself was frozen in time, a monument to everything that was stolen from me inside those walls. What I am about to tell you is difficult. It changed the entire trajectory of my life and left wounds that took nearly 50 years to begin healing. But I believe these stories must be told, because somewhere right now there is another 11-year-old girl sitting in a Kingdom Hall, feeling that cold, crawling sensation in her stomach, wondering if she is imagining things or if something is very wrong. She is not imagining anything, and this story is for her. To understand what happened to me, you need to understand the world I lived in. The world of Jehovah's Witnesses is not like other religious communities. It is a complete system, a way of thinking, speaking, and existing that touches every corner of your life. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, you are a witness first and a person second. Every decision, every relationship, every dream must pass through the filter of organizational approval. My mother, Dorothy May Ashford, was a devout woman who had found the organization during a difficult period in her life. She had grown up Catholic, married my father young, and struggled with his drinking and occasional violence. When two well-dressed women knocked on her door one Tuesday morning offering a free Bible study, she saw it as divine intervention. Within a year, she had dedicated her life to Jehovah and gotten baptized. My father followed reluctantly, more to keep peace in the marriage than out of genuine conviction. When he died, my mother interpreted it as a sign that she needed to draw even closer to the organization. Jehovah took your father because he wasn't serving with his whole heart, she told me once when I was 9. We must never let our zeal cool down, Evelyn. We must always put the kingdom first. Those words shaped my childhood. I learned that love was conditional, that Jehovah's approval depended on meeting quotas of service hours, attending every meeting without fail, and maintaining a reputation of spiritual strength. I learned that questioning was dangerous, that independent thinking was the first step toward apostasy, and that the organization's guidance was superior to any personal feeling or intuition. This is the context in which Harold Whitmore operated. He understood instinctively how the system worked, how to use its structures to his advantage. He knew that a single mother raising a daughter alone was vulnerable, that she craved the approval of elders and spiritually strong brothers. He knew that in a community where everyone watched everyone else, the appearance of righteousness was more valuable than actual integrity. Harold had arrived in Dayton with glowing letters of recommendation from his previous congregation. The elders spoke of him with reverence, a pioneer who had served in places where the need was great, a brother who had sacrificed marriage and career to dedicate himself fully to Jehovah's service. What they did not mention, what perhaps they did not know or chose not to investigate, was why he had transferred so suddenly, leaving behind a congregation where he had served for over 15 years. I learned the truth about that much later, but in 1976, Harold was simply the kind, attentive brother who helped my mother and paid special attention to my spiritual development. The first time it happened was a Thursday evening in October. My mother had stayed late at the Kingdom Hall to help with a special cleaning project, and Harold offered to drive me home. I did not want to go with him. That cold feeling in my stomach had grown stronger over the months, but refusing would have seemed ungrateful, even disrespectful. So I climbed into his brown Chevrolet and sat as close to the passenger door as I could. He did not drive me directly home. Instead, he took a detour through the industrial area near the river, parking behind an abandoned warehouse where the streetlights did not reach. I remember the smell of his cologne mixing with the musty scent of his car's vinyl seats. I remember the sound of his breathing changing. I remember wanting to scream, but feeling as though my throat had been filled with concrete. What he did to me that night, I will not describe in detail. Some memories are too sacred in their horror to be laid out for public consumption, but I will tell you that when it was over, when he finally drove me home and walked me to the door as though nothing had happened, he leaned down and whispered something I would hear many times in the months that followed. "This is our special secret, Evelyn. Jehovah sees everything, and he knows you wanted this. If you tell anyone, they will know you are a wicked girl who tempted a servant of God." I was 11 years old. I believed him. The abuse continued for nearly 2 years. Harold had perfected his approach over what I now understand was a lifetime of predation. He created opportunities, volunteering to pick me up from school, offering to help me with my talks for the Theocratic Ministry School, suggesting private Bible study sessions to prepare me for baptism. My mother was grateful for his attention, seeing it as a blessing from Jehovah that such a spiritual man was taking an interest in her fatherless daughter. "Brother Whitmore is like the father you never really had," she said once, and I had to excuse myself to vomit in the bathroom. During this period, I developed what I now recognize as classic trauma responses. I became withdrawn and anxious. My grades, which had always been excellent, began to slip. I stopped raising my hand during watchtower studies. I flinched whenever anyone touched me unexpectedly. My mother noticed these changes, but attributed them to the difficulties of adolescence, perhaps to grief over my father that was finally surfacing. "You need to pray more," she advised. "Satan attacks us when we let our guard down spiritually." The congregation too noticed that something was different about me. Sister Patterson, the elderly woman who hosted our Tuesday book studies, once pulled me aside after a meeting. "Evelyn, dear, you seem troubled lately. Is everything all right at home?" For a moment I considered telling her. The words rose in my throat like bile, desperate to escape. But then I saw Harold across the room, watching us with that slight smile he always wore, and the words died before they could be born. "I am fine, Sister Patterson, just tired from school." She patted my hand and let it go. That was how things worked in our world. Surface questions, surface answers, and beneath it all, an unspoken agreement not to dig too deep. Because digging deep might uncover things that would reflect poorly on the congregation, on the organization, on Jehovah's name. There was one person who might have seen more than the others. Sister Marlene Cooper was a young woman in her 20s who had recently married and moved to our congregation. She was different from the other sisters. She asked questions during meetings, challenged interpretations, expressed opinions that made the elders shift uncomfortably in their seats. The older sisters called her headstrong. The elders counseled her husband to help her develop a more submissive attitude. One Sunday after meeting, Marlene approached me while I was waiting for my mother to finish talking with the elders. "Evelyn, can I ask you something?" Her voice was low, careful. "Brother Whitmore, does he ever make you feel uncomfortable?" My heart stopped. No one had ever asked me that question directly. For a long moment, I stood frozen, caught between the desperate need to finally tell someone and the paralyzing fear of what would happen if I did. Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my side. "Sister Cooper, how lovely to see you. Evelyn, say goodbye. We need to get home for lunch." Marlene's eyes met mine for just a second, filled with something that might have been understanding, might have been a warning. Then the moment passed, and I was being ushered out to the car, the question hanging unanswered in the fluorescent-lit air of the Kingdom Hall. I never saw Marlene again. A few weeks later, it was announced that she and her husband had moved to another congregation. The elders mentioned something about spiritual difficulties, but a need for a fresh start in a new environment. Years later, I would learn that Marlene had tried to raise concerns about Harold to the elders, and that she had been counseled strongly about the dangers of spreading rumors and damaging the reputation of faithful brothers. The organization had a system for dealing with people who asked uncomfortable questions. It was efficient and ruthless, and it worked. Meanwhile, Harold continued his work uninterrupted. I was not his only victim. I know that now. There were other girls in the congregation, other vulnerable children whose parents trusted the wrong person. But we did not talk to each other, did not compare experiences, did not realize that our individual nightmares were part of a larger pattern. The culture of silence ensured that each of us suffered alone, believing we were the only ones, believing somehow that we were to blame. My mother remained oblivious, or perhaps chose to be. Looking back, I wonder if there were moments when she suspected something, when a maternal instinct tried to break through the layers of indoctrination. But if such moments existed, she suppressed them. To acknowledge what was happening would have meant confronting the possibility that the organization she had built her life around was not what it claimed to be. And that was a possibility too terrifying to face. By the time I turned 13, something inside me had calcified. The girl who once sang kingdom songs with genuine joy, who dreamed of serving at Bethel and pioneering in foreign lands, had been replaced by a hollow version of herself. I went through the motions, attending meetings, going in service, studying the publications, but my heart was no longer in it. How could I love an organization that protected the man who was destroying me? How could I trust elders who looked past the obvious signs of my suffering? I did not yet have the words to articulate these questions. I only knew that something was fundamentally broken, either in me or in the world around me. And I was determined, with the stubborn survival instinct of a wounded child, to find out which it was. The answer would come sooner than I expected, and it would change everything. But before that moment arrived, there were still months of suffering to endure. Months of Thursday evenings, when Harold would find excuses to be alone with me. Months of Sunday mornings sitting in the Kingdom Hall, watching him give talks from the platform about moral purity and Christian conduct, while I dug my fingernails into my palms until they bled. My bedroom was my only sanctuary. A small room painted pale yellow with white curtains my mother had sewn. I had a wooden desk, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt my grandmother had made, and a bookshelf filled with organization publications. But hidden behind those publications were my secret treasures. A worn copy of Anne of Green Gables and a journal where I wrote poems. I developed rituals of survival. Every morning I would tell myself that I would get through one more day. Every night, I would write in my journal about small moments of beauty, a cardinal outside my window, sunlight through the Kingdom Hall's stained glass. I was teaching myself that there was still goodness in the world. There was one elder who treated me with kindness. Brother Eugene Martinez was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who worked as a janitor. Sometimes, after meetings, he would hand me butterscotch candy. "Keep your chin up, little one. The world is hard, but you are stronger than you know." I wondered if Brother Martinez suspected something. He did not seem impressed by Harold. Once I saw him watching Harold with wariness and sorrow. But if he had concerns, he never voiced them. The congregation was a study in contradictions. On the surface, it appeared to be a community of love, but beneath that surface was surveillance and judgment, a constant awareness that everyone was watching everyone else. This made it the perfect hunting ground for someone like Harold. The culture of trust meant parents did not question when a respected brother offered to help with their children. The culture of silence meant victims learned quickly not to speak. So I stayed silent, and I survived. And I waited for something to change. The change came in the spring of 1978, a few weeks after my 13th birthday. I had just returned from a district assembly in Columbus. 3 days of sitting in uncomfortable convention center seats, listening to talks about faithfulness and endurance. Harold had been there too, of course, serving as an attendant and receiving praise from the circuit overseer for his exemplary attitude. Watching him shake hands with brothers from other congregations, smiling that gentle smile that no one but me seemed to recognize as a mask, I felt something shift inside my chest. It was not hope exactly. It was more like a hardening, a decision made somewhere beneath the level of conscious thought. I could not continue this way. Something had to change, even if I did not yet know what or how. The first crack in Harold's carefully constructed facade appeared unexpectedly. I was helping my mother clean out the storage closet at the Kingdom Hall one Saturday morning, a task I normally dreaded, but which that day offered a welcome distraction from my own thoughts. We were sorting through boxes of old literature, deciding what to keep and what to discard, when I found a folder that had been misfiled among outdated magazines. Inside were letters, correspondence between the elders of our congregation and someone at the branch office, dating back to the time of Harold's arrival in Dayton. My hands trembled as I read the formal language, the careful euphemisms, the spaces between the words where the truth had been deliberately erased. The letters referenced concerns that had been raised at Harold's previous congregation. They mentioned a judicial matter that had been resolved, but which the branch felt should be communicated to the receiving congregation as a precaution. They spoke of Harold's sincere repentance and the merciful decision to allow him to continue serving. I did not understand all of it. The language of organizational bureaucracy was still foreign to me at 13, but I understood enough. Harold had done something before, something serious enough to warrant correspondence with the branch office, something that the elders of our congregation had known about when they welcomed him with open arms and allowed him unrestricted access to the families in our hall. My mother called my name from across the room, and I shoved the folder back where I had found it. My heart pounding so loudly, I was certain she would hear it. For the rest of the morning, I moved through my tasks mechanically, sorting magazines and wiping shelves, while my mind raced through the implications of what I had discovered. They knew, or at least they had reason to suspect, and they had done nothing. That night, I lay awake in my yellow bedroom, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how the world could work this way. The organization claimed to be guided by Jehovah's Holy Spirit, claimed to protect its members from the dangers of Satan's system. But here was evidence that the men entrusted with our spiritual welfare had knowingly placed a predator in our midst and then looked the other way when the inevitable happened. I thought about telling my mother. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, imagining how I would show her the letters, how I would finally explain what Harold had been doing to me. But every time I reached the moment of confession, I saw her face closing off, heard her voice telling me that I was confused, that Satan was planting lies in my mind, that I needed to trust the elders and not question Jehovah's organization. She would not believe me. I knew this with the certainty of someone who has spent their entire life learning to read the unspoken rules of their environment. My mother's faith in the organization was stronger than her faith in me. It had to be, because the alternative, acknowledging that the structure she had built her life around was fundamentally corrupt, was too terrifying to contemplate. So I said nothing, but I began to watch, to listen, to gather information with a new intentionality. I paid attention to the whispered conversations between sisters after meetings, the glances exchanged when Harold's name was mentioned, the careful way certain families kept their children close when he was nearby. I was not the only one who sensed something wrong. I was just the only one who had been too young and too isolated to understand what I was sensing. Over the following months, I pieced together fragments of a larger picture. There was a family, the Hendersons, who had left our congregation abruptly about a year before Harold arrived. I remembered Sister Henderson's daughter, a quiet girl named Rebecca, who had been 2 years older than me. We had sat together at book study meetings sometimes, sharing a Bible and passing notes about the boring paragraphs. Then one day they were gone, and when I asked my mother what had happened, she said only that they had moved away, and we should not gossip about other people's business. Now I wondered if their departure had been connected to Harold somehow. Had Rebecca been another victim? Had the Hendersons discovered what he was and fled rather than fight a battle they knew they could not win? I also noticed that Harold's attention was beginning to shift. There was a new family in the congregation, the Carsons, with a 9-year-old daughter named Michelle who had blonde hair and a shy smile. I watched Harold positioning himself near her at meetings, offering to help with her schoolwork, complimenting her mother on what a sweet and spiritually minded child she was raising. The pattern was so familiar, it made me physically ill. One Thursday evening after the meeting, I approached Michelle in the bathroom while her mother was talking with the elders. She was washing her hands at the sink, humming a kingdom song under her breath. "Michelle," I said, keeping my voice low, "be careful around Brother Whitmore." She looked up at me with wide eyes, confused. "What do you mean?" I hesitated. What could I say that a 9-year-old would understand without traumatizing her? How could I warn her without revealing my own shame? "Just do not ever let him be alone with you. If he offers to drive you somewhere or help you with something, always make sure your mom is there too, okay?" Michelle nodded slowly, still confused but perhaps sensing the urgency in my voice. Before I could say anything more, her mother appeared in the doorway, and the moment was over. I do not know if my warning made any difference. The Carsons moved away a few months later. A job transfer, the official story went. But I've always wondered if Michelle told her mother about our conversation, if her mother put the pieces together in a way mine never had. The turning point came in the summer of 1978. I was 13 and a half, and the abuse had been going on for nearly 2 years. Harold had become bolder over time, his assaults more frequent and more violent. He no longer bothered with the pretense of spiritual instruction or fatherly concern. He knew he had power over me, knew that I was too afraid and too trapped to resist, but something was changing in me too. The numbness that had protected me was giving way to rage, a cold, focused anger that felt like the first real emotion I had experienced in years. I began to fantasize about exposing him, about standing up in the middle of a Sunday meeting and telling everyone what he had done. I imagined the shock on their faces, the chaos that would follow, the justice that would finally be served. These fantasies sustained me through the darkest moments, but I knew they were just fantasies. In reality, I had no power, no credibility, no way to make anyone believe me over a respected elder who had served Jehovah faithfully for decades. Then I met Patricia Walsh. Patricia was visiting our congregation for the summer, staying with her aunt, while her parents dealt with some kind of family crisis back in Cleveland. She was 15, tall and angular, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. Unlike most visiting witnesses, she did not try to fit in or make friends. She sat in the back row during meetings, arms crossed, watching the proceedings with an expression of barely concealed contempt. I was drawn to her immediately. There was something in her stance, in her refusal to perform the expected pieties, that spoke to the part of me I had learned to keep hidden. One afternoon, we found ourselves alone in the Kingdom Hall parking lot, both waiting for rides that were running late. "You hate it here too," she said. It was not a question. I looked around to make sure no one could hear us. "What do you mean?" Patricia laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. "You know exactly what I mean. This whole thing." She gestured at the Kingdom Hall behind us. "The meetings, the service, the constant surveillance. It is all about control. They want to own every part of your mind." I had never heard anyone speak so openly about the organization. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. "My parents are hardcore," Patricia continued, "real, true believers. But I have been doing research. There are people out there, apostates, they call them, who have left and written about what really goes on. The lies, the cover-ups, the way they protect predators and silence victims." My breath caught in my throat. "Protect predators?" Patricia looked at me closely. "Why? Do you know something?" For a long moment, I stood on the edge of confession. The words were right there, pressing against my teeth, desperate to escape. But old habits are hard to break, and the fear that had been my constant companion for 2 years was not easily overcome. I have heard things," I said finally. Patricia nodded, seeming to understand what I was not saying. "Be careful. These people are not what they pretend to be, and if you ever need help, if you ever need someone to believe you, I will be here for the rest of the summer." That conversation changed something in me. For the first time, I understood that there were others who saw through the facade, who questioned the organization's claims to divine authority. I was not crazy. I was not being deceived by Satan. The wrongness I sensed was real, and there were people willing to name it. Patricia and I talked several more times over the following weeks. She told me about a network of former witnesses who supported each other, shared information, helped people who were trying to leave. She gave me a phone number, a woman in Columbus who ran an informal support group, and made me promise to memorize it and then destroy the paper. "If things ever get really bad," she said, "you call that number. They can help." I never called during that summer, but knowing the number existed, knowing there was a world beyond the Kingdom Hall where people would believe me, gave me a strength I had not felt before. Meanwhile, Harold continued his predation, oblivious to the change happening inside me. He had grown complacent over the years, confident that his position and my silence would protect him indefinitely. He did not notice that I no longer cried during his assaults, that my eyes had gone hard and watchful, that I was memorizing details, dates, times, locations, the specific threats he used to ensure my compliance. I was building a case. I did not know yet what I would do with it, but I was no longer a passive victim. I was gathering evidence for a reckoning that I could feel approaching, like a storm on the horizon. The summer ended. Patricia returned to Cleveland, and we lost touch. Mail was too risky, and phone calls would have raised questions neither of us could answer. But she left me with something invaluable: the knowledge that escape was possible, that the organization's power was not absolute, that there were people on the outside who would help if I could only find the courage to reach them. School started again in September. I was entering 8th grade, my final year before high school, and my teachers noted a change in my demeanor. I was more focused, more serious, less willing to accept easy answers. One teacher, Mrs. Elaine Rodriguez, pulled me aside after class one day. "Evelyn, I've noticed you seem different this year, more determined somehow. Is everything all right at home?" Teachers asking about home life were dangerous. They were worldly people, outside the truth, potentially tools of Satan to lure young witnesses away from Jehovah. I knew I should give a vague answer and change the subject. Instead, I looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, really looked at her, at the concern in her eyes, at the way she leaned forward as if ready to catch me if I fell, and I said something I had never said to anyone. "Not really, but I am working on it." She nodded slowly. "If you ever need to talk, my door is always open. No judgment, no pressure, just someone willing to listen." I thanked her and left, my heart racing. It was a small moment, easily dismissed, but it was another crack in the wall that had kept me imprisoned, another person offering help, another reminder that the world outside the organization was not the spiritual wasteland I had been taught to fear. October brought the circuit assembly, held in a rented auditorium downtown. I sat through hours of talks about remaining faithful, about resisting the world's influence, about trusting in Jehovah's organization even when we did not understand its decisions. Harold was on the program, delivering a 10-minute talk about moral cleanness and the importance of confessing sins to the elders. I watched him standing at the podium, his voice warm and paternal, his gestures practiced and sincere. The audience listened attentively, taking notes, nodding along. No one suspected, no one even questioned. He was a respected brother giving spiritual counsel, and they absorbed his words as though they came from Jehovah himself. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not visibly. I did not stand up and scream or run from the auditorium. The break was internal, a final severing of the thread that had kept me connected to the organization's authority. I looked around at the thousands of witnesses filling the seats, at their earnest faces and their highlighted magazines, and I understood with perfect clarity that they were all trapped in the same lie. Some were predators hiding behind positions of power. Most were victims who did not yet know what had been taken from them, and I was done pretending. After the assembly, my mother wanted to stay and socialize with friends from other congregations. I told her I was not feeling well and asked if I could wait in the car. She handed me the keys with barely a glance. My recent compliance had lulled her into thinking I was finally becoming the daughter she wanted. I did not go to the car. Instead, I found a payphone in the lobby and dialed the number Patricia had given me, the one I had memorized and never forgotten. A woman answered on the third ring. Her voice was warm, careful, like someone used to receiving calls from people in crisis. "Hello? My name is Evelyn," I said. "I am calling because I need help. I am a witness, and something bad has been happening to me, and I do not know what to do." There was a pause, then, "Evelyn, I am so glad you called. You are safe now. We are going to help you. Can you tell me what is going on?" And standing there in that fluorescent-lit lobby, with the sound of Kingdom songs drifting from the auditorium, where Harold was probably still shaking hands and receiving compliments, I began to tell my story. It was the first time I had ever spoken the words out loud to someone who was not part of the organization. It was the first time I had trusted a stranger with the truth that had been eating me alive for 2 years. It was the beginning of the end, and the beginning of something else entirely. The woman on the phone, whose name was Margaret, listened without interrupting. When I finished, she spoke calmly. "Evelyn, what you have described is a crime. It is not your fault, and you deserve protection. I'm going to give you another number, a counselor who specializes in helping young people in your situation. Her name is Dr. Sarah Winters, and she works at a clinic in Dayton." I memorized the number. Margaret also gave me her own number again and told me to call any time. "You are not alone, Evelyn. There are many of us who have been through what you are going through. The organization wants you to believe that leaving means death, but there is life on the other side, real life, with real freedom." I hung up feeling something I had not felt in 2 years. Hope. The weeks that followed were a strange double life. On the surface, I continued to be the obedient witness daughter, but beneath that surface I was planning. I called Dr. Winters and made an appointment, telling my mother I was staying after school for a study group. I began keeping a detailed journal of Harold's abuse. I also started reading organizational literature with critical eyes. The constant warnings about apostates, the emphasis on obedience over conscience, it all looked different now that I knew there were people who had escaped and built new lives. My first appointment with Dr. Winters was on a Tuesday afternoon. Her office had neutral colors and comfortable furniture. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Evelyn, everything you tell me is confidential. The only exception is if I believe you are in immediate danger. Do you understand?" I nodded, terrified. This was different from talking to Margaret on the phone. This was a real person, waiting to hear my darkest secret, and so I told her. I told her about Harold, about the abuse, about the letters I had found, about the organization's culture of silence. I told her about my mother's devotion, about my fear of not being believed, about the shame that had become my constant companion. Dr. Winters listened without judgment. "Evelyn, what you have experienced is sexual abuse. It is a serious crime, and it has nothing to do with who you are or anything you did. The shame you feel belongs to the man who hurt you, not to you." I nodded, though understanding it intellectually and believing it emotionally were two very different things. "You have options. You can report this to the police. You can confront your abuser with support. You can focus on healing first. There is no right or wrong path, only what feels right for you." What if no one believes me? Some people may not believe you, but some will, and the truth is the truth, regardless of who believes it. I left that first session feeling exhausted, but lighter. Someone knew. Someone believed me. Over the following months, I continued to see Dr. Winters weekly. We worked on processing the trauma, on building coping strategies, on preparing for the eventual confrontation. She never pushed me to report before I was ready, but she helped me understand that my silence was protecting Harold and potentially putting other children at risk. That knowledge weighed heavily. I thought about Michelle Carson, about other children in the congregation whose parents trusted Harold. How many were suffering in silence? The winter of 1978 was brutal. During one particularly bad storm, the Thursday meeting was cancelled, and my mother invited several families to our house. Harold was among them. I was in the kitchen helping my mother when Harold approached me near the refrigerator. The other adults were in the living room singing kingdom songs. "Evelyn," Harold said quietly, "you have been distant lately. I hope you are not forgetting our special friendship." His hand reached for my arm, and something in me exploded. I stepped back, my voice louder than intended. "Do not touch me." The singing faltered. My mother appeared in the doorway. "Evelyn, what is going on?" Harold's expression shifted to wounded concern. "I was just asking if she was feeling all right. Perhaps the pressures of adolescence." My mother nodded. "She has been moody. I have been meaning to talk to the elders about some shepherding visits." I stood frozen as the moment passed. Harold gave me a look, a clear warning. I had shown my hand too early. That night I made a decision. I could not wait any longer. The confrontation was coming, whether I was ready or not. The next morning, I asked my mother if I could speak with her. She was preparing for field service. "Can it wait until after service?" "No. It cannot wait." Something in my tone made her stop. She sat at the kitchen table. "What is it, Evelyn?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment I had been preparing for. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Brother Whitmore. Something that has been happening for almost 2 years." And then I told her. My mother's face went through several transformations as I spoke. First confusion, then disbelief, then something that looked like fear. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her hands gripping the edge of the kitchen table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Evelyn," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you understand what you are saying? Brother Whitmore is one of the most respected men in our congregation. He has served Jehovah faithfully for decades." "I know what he is, Mom. I know what he has done to me for almost 2 years." She shook her head, not in denial exactly, but as if trying to shake the words loose from her understanding. "This cannot be true. Satan confuses young minds. The publications warn us about this, about how the devil plants false memories, makes us doubt righteous men. These are not false memories. This is what happened. Every Thursday when you stayed late at the hall, every time he drove me home from school, every time you left us alone because you trusted him. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. I trusted him because the elders trusted him, because the organization trusted him. Are you saying they were all wrong? Yes, I said. That is exactly what I am saying. The conversation that followed was the most painful of my life. My mother cycled through denial, anger, bargaining, and something that was not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of doubt. She asked me questions, invasive, humiliating questions that made me want to crawl out of my own skin. She demanded details, as if the specificity of my account would somehow prove or disprove its truth. Through it all, I held firm. Dr. Winters had prepared me for this. She had warned me that my mother might react with disbelief, might even turn against me. But she had also reminded me that speaking the truth was its own form of liberation, regardless of how others responded. Finally, my mother stood up from the table. Her face had gone pale, and she looked suddenly old, as if the past hour had aged her 10 years. "We need to speak with the elders," she said. "This is a serious accusation. They will know how to handle it properly." My heart sank. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that my mother would believe me, would protect me, would choose her daughter over the organization. Instead, she was doing what she had been trained to do, deferring to male authority, trusting the system over her own child. "Mum, the elders will not help. They knew about Harold's past when he came here. I found the letters." She stared at me. "What letters?" I told her about the correspondence I had discovered in the Kingdom Hall storage closet. As I spoke, I watched something shift in her expression, a crack in the wall of faith she had built around herself. "I need to see those letters," she said quietly. We drove to the Kingdom Hall together. It was a weekday morning, and the building was empty. My mother had a key. She was responsible for the cleaning rotation. And we let ourselves in through the side door. The storage closet was exactly as I had left it months ago, the folder still misfiled among outdated magazines. My mother read the letters in silence. When she finished, she sat down heavily on a stack of bound volumes and began to cry. "They knew," she said between sobs. "They knew, and they did nothing. They let him into our home. They let him near my daughter." I knelt beside her, feeling something I had not expected. Compassion for this woman who had failed to protect me, who had chosen her religion over her child. She was a victim too, in her own way. The organization had stolen her ability to think critically, to trust her own instincts, to put her family first. "Mum, I need to report this to the police. I need to make sure Harold cannot hurt anyone else." She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "If you do that, they will disfellowship us. We will lose everything, our friends, our community, our hope of surviving Armageddon." "I know," I said, "but I cannot stay silent anymore. There are other children in danger. I have to do what is right, even if it costs me everything." The meeting with the elders took place 3 days later. My mother had insisted on following proper procedure, on giving the organization a chance to handle things internally before we involved worldly authorities. I agreed reluctantly. knowing in my heart that it would change nothing but wanting to give her this small comfort. We sat in the back room of the Kingdom Hall, the same room where judicial committees met, where disfellowshipping announcements were prepared, where the fates of wayward witnesses were decided. 3 elders faced us across a folding table. Brother Morrison, the presiding overseer, Brother Caldwell, an elderly man who had served for decades, and Brother Simmons, the youngest of the 3. Harold was not present. The elders had decided it would be better to hear my account first, without the accused in the room. I told my story again, as I had told it to my mother, to Dr. Winters, to Margaret on the phone. The elders listened with carefully neutral expressions, occasionally exchanging glances I could not interpret. When I finished, Brother Morrison cleared his throat. "Sister Ashford, these are very serious allegations. You understand that accusing a brother of such conduct is not something we take lightly." "I understand. That is why I am telling you." "The scriptures require 2 witnesses to establish a matter," Brother Caldwell said. "Were there any witnesses to these alleged incidents?" I stared at him. He made sure we were always alone. That is how predators operate. Brother Simmons leaned forward. "Evelyn, is it possible you misinterpreted Brother Whitmore's intentions? Perhaps what felt inappropriate was actually just fatherly affection." Something inside me went cold and hard. I had known this would happen. I had prepared for it. But hearing it spoken aloud, the casual dismissal, the reflexive protection of the abuser, still felt like a knife in my chest. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I did not misinterpret anything. And I have evidence that Brother Whitmore was disciplined for similar behavior before he came to this congregation. You received letters about it from the branch office." The elders' faces changed. Brother Morrison's neutral expression cracked, revealing something that might have been alarm. "How do you know about those letters?" "I found them, and I made copies." The room went silent. My mother sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could feel her trembling. "I am going to the police," I said, "tomorrow. I wanted to give you the opportunity to do the right thing first. But I can see now that was a mistake." I stood up and walked out of that room, my mother following close behind. Behind us, I heard Brother Morrison's voice, urgent and worried, but I did not turn around. I was done listening to them. It was time for the world to listen to me. The police station on 3rd Street was a squat brick building that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee. I had driven past it hundreds of times on my way to field service, never imagining I would one day walk through its doors to report a crime committed by a man my mother had called a servant of God. Detective Linda Hartwell was assigned to my case. She was a woman in her 50s, with short grey hair and eyes that had seen too much but still held a spark of compassion. She listened to my account with the focused attention of someone trained to separate truth from fabrication, occasionally asking questions to clarify details. "Evelyn, I want you to know that what you are doing takes tremendous courage," she said when I finished. "Many victims never come forward, especially when the abuser is protected by a religious institution. You should be proud of yourself." I did not feel proud. I felt exhausted, hollowed out, like a shell of a person going through motions that no longer seemed connected to any recognizable self. But I nodded and accepted her words because I understood she meant them kindly. The investigation that followed was slow and painful. Harold denied everything, of course. The elders closed ranks, providing him with character references and casting doubt on my credibility. My mother, caught between her daughter and her faith, retreated into a kind of numb paralysis, neither fully supporting me nor openly opposing me. The congregation's response was swift and brutal. Within weeks of my police report becoming known, I was summoned to a judicial committee meeting. The charge was not anything related to Harold's abuse. The organization had no interest in addressing that. Instead, I was accused of causing divisions, of bringing reproach on Jehovah's name, of failing to handle matters in a theocratic manner. I did not attend the meeting. There was no point. I knew how it would end. The disfellowshipping announcement came on a Thursday evening, read from the platform by Brother Morrison himself. Evelyn Ruth Ashford is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. 7 words that erased my entire social existence, that transformed me overnight from a member of the community into a spiritual pariah. The shunning began immediately. Sisters who had known me since childhood crossed the street to avoid me. Brothers who had watched me grow up pretended not to see me when we passed in public. Even my own grandmother, my mother's mother, the woman who had introduced our family to the organization, refused to speak to me. "You have brought shame on Jehovah's name," she said the one time I tried to approach her. "Until you repent and return, you are dead to me." My mother was the only one who maintained contact, though our relationship had become strained and complicated. She had not been disfellowshipped. She had played no active role in my police report, and she had expressed sufficient contrition to the elders for her daughter's apostasy. But she lived in a state of constant conflict, torn between her love for me and her fear of losing her standing in the only community she had ever known. "I believe you, Evelyn," she told me one evening, sitting in our kitchen while rain streaked the windows. "I should have believed you from the beginning, but I do not know how to leave. This is all I have ever known." I understood her fear better than she realized. The organization had spent decades constructing a world in which leaving was unthinkable, in which the outside world was portrayed as a spiritual wasteland filled with demons and dangers. Breaking free from that mental prison was not simply a matter of walking away. It required dismantling an entire way of thinking, rebuilding oneself from the foundation up. During those difficult months, Dr. Winters became my lifeline. Our sessions shifted from processing past trauma to navigating present challenges. The isolation of shunning, the grief of losing my entire community, the complicated process of building a new identity outside the organization's constraints. "You are experiencing a form of bereavement," she explained. "The community you lost was real, even if it was built on a foundation of control and deception. It is okay to grieve what you have lost, while also recognizing that leaving was the right choice." I also reconnected with Margaret, the woman from the support network who had first answered my call from the convention center lobby. She introduced me to others who had left the organization, former elders, pioneers, even a few who had served at the branch office. Their stories were remarkably similar to mine, awakening to the organization's deceptions, facing ostracism and shunning, slowly rebuilding lives outside the walls that had once defined their existence. "The first year is the hardest," Margaret told me. "You are grieving and growing at the same time. But it does get easier. One day you will wake up and realize you are free, really free, and you will wonder how you ever lived any other way." The criminal case against Harold moved forward with agonizing slowness. The prosecutor warned me that cases involving religious institutions were notoriously difficult to win. The organization's lawyers were skilled and well-funded, and juries were often reluctant to convict respected church members based on the testimony of young women who had been expelled from the congregation. But something unexpected happened during the discovery process. Other victims came forward. First one, then another, then 3 more, women from Harold's previous congregation in Pennsylvania, women who had been silenced and shamed and told that their suffering was less important than the organization's reputation. When they learned that someone had finally broken the wall of silence, they found the courage to add their voices to mine. The case became bigger than just my story. It became a reckoning for an entire system that had prioritized institutional protection over child safety. Journalists began investigating, filing public records requests, interviewing former members willing to speak on the record. The organization's practice of handling abuse allegations internally, of requiring 2 witnesses to establish wrongdoing, of discouraging victims from reporting to police, all of it came under scrutiny. Harold was eventually convicted on multiple counts. The sentence was not as long as I had hoped, but it was something. He would spend years in prison, away from children, unable to hide behind the shield of religious authority, and his name would be forever associated with the crimes he had committed, a permanent record that no amount of organizational whitewashing could erase. The day of the sentencing, I sat in the courtroom and watched Harold being led away in handcuffs. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, diminished. The man who had terrorized my childhood, who had stolen my innocence and nearly destroyed my faith in humanity, was just a pathetic figure in an ill-fitting suit, finally facing consequences for his actions. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated. I felt tired and sad and strangely empty. Justice, I was learning, was not a destination but a process, one that required constant vigilance and collective action to maintain. After the trial, I made a decision. I would use my experience to help others who were still trapped, still suffering in silence, still believing the lies they had been told about their own worthlessness. I began volunteering with organizations that supported survivors of religious abuse. I spoke at conferences and support groups. I told my story again and again, not because I enjoyed reliving the trauma, but because I knew that somewhere in the audience there might be another girl who needed to hear that escape was possible. My mother eventually left the organization. It took years, a slow process of questioning and research and painful confrontation with truths she had spent her life avoiding. But one day she walked into my apartment, sat down at my kitchen table, and said the words I had waited decades to hear. "I am sorry, Evelyn. I should have protected you. I should have believed you. I was so afraid of losing my faith that I almost lost my daughter." We held each other and cried, tears of grief for the years we had lost, tears of relief for the relationship we were finally beginning to rebuild. The road ahead would not be easy. There was too much history, too much pain, too many conversations that still needed to happen. But for the first time, I believed we might find our way to something resembling peace. The Kingdom Hall on Riverside Drive is still there. I drove past it again recently, and this time I did not have to pull over. The tan bricks no longer held power over me. The building was just a building, and the memories it contained were just memories. Painful, yes, but no longer capable of defining who I am. I am 63 years old now. I have built a life outside those walls, a life filled with genuine relationships and authentic faith and the hard-won freedom that comes from speaking truth to power. The organization stole my childhood, but it did not steal my future. That belonged to me, and I claimed it back one painful step at a time. There were moments when I wondered if I had made the right choice. Lonely nights in my first apartment, listening to the silence where once there had been the constant hum of congregation activity. Holidays spent alone because my family had chosen the organization over me. The persistent fear that Armageddon might come at any moment. But those moments grew less frequent as time passed. I made new friends, real friends who loved me for who I was. I discovered interests and talents that had been suppressed during my years as a witness. I learned to think for myself, to question authority, to trust my own judgment. The scars remain. They always will, but they have become part of my story rather than the whole of it. I am more than a victim. I am a survivor, an advocate, a voice for those still unable to speak. And I am proof that there is life after the organization. Beautiful, messy, complicated life. The paradise they promised was always a lie. But the freedom I found is real. Last spring, I received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address, postmarked from a city I did not recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in neat, careful handwriting. Dear Evelyn, it began, "You do not know me, but you saved my life. I was 16 when I heard your story for the first time. I was being abused by an elder in my congregation, and I had convinced myself that telling anyone would destroy everything. My family, my friendships, my relationship with Jehovah. Your courage gave me the courage I needed. I reported my abuser. I left the organization. And now, 10 years later, I'm living a life I never thought possible. Thank you for speaking when it would have been easier to stay silent. Thank you for showing me that freedom was real." I sat at my kitchen table and read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. This is why I told my story. Not for justice, though justice mattered. Not for revenge, though I would be lying if I said part of me did not want Harold to suffer the way he had made me suffer. I told my story so that somewhere, someone like me, trapped and terrified and convinced that escape was impossible, might hear it and find the strength to reach for the light. The organization of Jehovah's Witnesses continues to operate. Millions of sincere people around the world still believe they have found the one true religion, the only path to salvation, the sole channel through which God communicates with humanity. I do not hate these people. Many of them are victims themselves, trapped in a system they do not fully understand, following rules they have never been encouraged to question. But I will never stop speaking out against the policies that enabled my abuse and the abuse of countless others. The 2-witness rule that requires corroboration for allegations of wrongdoing, a rule that effectively protects predators who operate in private. The practice of handling abuse cases internally rather than reporting to authorities. The culture of shunning that isolates victims and protects abusers by making speaking out seem worse than staying silent. These are not abstract policies. They are mechanisms of harm, carefully maintained by an organization that prioritizes its reputation over the safety of its most vulnerable members. And as long as they remain in place, children will continue to suffer the way I suffered. If you are watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you are being abused or if you know someone who is, please hear me when I say this. You are not alone. What is happening to you is not your fault. You deserve to be believed, to be protected, to be free. There are people who will help you. There are organizations outside the Witnesses dedicated to supporting survivors of religious abuse. There are counselors who understand the unique challenges of leaving a high-control group. There is a whole world out there waiting for you, full of people who will love you for who you are, rather than for what you can do for an institution. The first step is the hardest. I know because I have taken it. But once you take that step, once you start moving toward freedom, you will discover strength you never knew you had. If you are a Jehovah's Witness watching this, I want you to understand something. I am not your enemy. I am not being used by Satan to attack your faith. I am a human being who experienced unimaginable harm at the hands of someone the organization was supposed to have vetted and supervised. My story is not unique. There are thousands of stories like mine, and more being created every day, because the policies that enabled my abuse remain unchanged. Please, if you have children, protect them. Do not assume that someone is safe just because they hold a position of authority in the congregation. Do not let your trust in the organization override your instincts as a parent, and if your child ever comes to you with a disclosure of abuse, believe them. Choose them over the institution. Choose them over your fear of what the elders might say or what the congregation might think. Your child needs you more than they need Jehovah's Witnesses. And Jehovah, if he exists, surely cares more about protecting innocent children than about protecting the reputation of an organization run by imperfect men. I think about that 11-year-old girl sometimes, the girl I used to be, sitting in the Kingdom Hall on Riverside Drive, feeling that cold, crawling sensation in her stomach whenever Harold looked her way. I wish I could go back in time and tell her that she was not imagining things, that her instincts were right, that the adults who should have protected her had failed her, but that failure did not define her worth. I wish I could tell her that she would survive, that the journey would be long and painful, but that freedom was waiting at the end of it, that the world outside the organization was not the spiritual wasteland she had been taught to fear, but a place full of beauty and love and possibilities she could not yet imagine. I cannot go back, but I can speak to the 11-year-old girls who exist right now in Kingdom Halls around the world, feeling that same cold sensation and wondering if they are crazy for being afraid of someone everyone else seems to trust. You are not crazy. Trust your instincts, and when you are ready, reach out for help. We are here, waiting to catch you. The sun is setting as I finish telling this story. I'm sitting on the porch of my small house, watching the light fade from gold to purple to the deep blue of approaching night. The air smells of jasmine from the bush my neighbor planted last year, and somewhere down the street a child is laughing. This is what freedom sounds like. This is what freedom smells like. This is what I fought for all those years ago, when a 13-year-old girl picked up a payphone and called a number she had memorized from a stranger. I do not know what happens after we die. The organization claimed to have all the answers, but I have learned to be comfortable with uncertainty. What I do know is that this life, this one precious life we have been given, is worth living fully, authentically, without the chains of fear and control that once bound me. To everyone who has listened to my story, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to my pain and my healing, my losses and my victories, the long road from that carpeted room in a Kingdom Hall to this porch where I sit in peace. This is a true story shared by one of our subscribers. Thank you so much for trusting us with your experience. If you also have a story you would like to share, please write in the comments. We would be very happy to tell your story on our channel. And to Evelyn Ruth Ashford, the girl who survived and the woman who thrived, your voice mattered, your courage mattered, and your story will continue to save lives long after these words have faded from the screen. The jasmine blooms in the evening air, the child's laughter echoes down the street, and somewhere a girl who feels trapped and alone is finding the strength to reach for the light. That is enough. That is everything.